Welcome to Navigating the Customer Experience. Want to improve your organization's customer service? Looking for insider tips to knock your customer socks off? Then you're in the right place. Here's your host, Yannick Grant.
Welcome to Navigating the Customer Experience. On today's episode, we have with us a very special guest, and his name is Jeff Toister. Jeff helps customer service teams unlock their hidden potential. He is the best-selling author of the Service Culture Handbook, a step-by-step guide to getting your employees obsessed with customer service. More than 140,000 people on 6 continents have taken his video-based training courses on LinkedIn Learning, aka lynda.com. Jeff's 15 training videos on LinkedIn Learning include Customer Service Foundations and Leading a Customer-Centric Culture. Jeff was named one of the top 30 customer service professionals in the world by Global Gurus. He was also named one of the top 50 thought leaders to follow on Twitter by the International Customer Management Institute. FeedSpot has named his Inside Customer Service blog one of the top 50 customer service blogs on the planet. Jeff holds a Certified Professional in Learning and Performance CPLP certification from the Association for Talent Development. So without further delay, welcome, Jeff.
Oh, thank you for having me here. I'm really excited.
Amazing. So, Jeff, you've done so much work in customer experience, customer service, customer-centric cultures. You have a blog. You're number one on Twitter. I mean, you've done so much and you look so young. Tell us now, what is your secret?
I get that a lot. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing.
It's good. It's actually a compliment.
Well, I appreciate it in that sense. We're always trying to look and feel young, right? And I do. And at the same time, sometimes people look at you and say, "Are you old enough to be here? Should you be giving me advice?"
True.
It's a double-edged sword.
I know. So I
good
want you
genes, I guess.
Very true. So you have to definitely thank your parents for that, right?
That's right.
I would like you to tell us a little bit about your journey, how you ended up in the spectrum or the industry of customer experience. What propelled you here?
Sure. It was the very first customer I ever served. And I'd love to tell you it was a success story, but it wasn't. I didn't do a good job. And that changed things for me. I was 16 years old. I was working in a retail clothing store, and I had gotten maybe 15 minutes of training. And the person who was supposed to be training me said, "I'm going on break. Good luck. Here's the key to the dressing room. Do the best you can. I'll be back." And I was nervous, as young kids often are, and I didn't know what I was supposed to do. And so a customer comes up to me, and I'm just thinking, "Oh no, I don't know anything." And that's obviously the wrong mindset, but that's the mindset I had. He asked, I'll never forget, he said, "Do you carry Dockers?" It's a brand of khakis. And I knew what they were. I had no idea if we carried them or not. And so I'm looking around the store and I'm hoping that there's a big neon sign that says Dockers right here. But there was not. And being 16, being inexperienced, the first words that came out of my mouth were, "I don't know." And without getting a second chance to recover, he got angry and he said, "Wow, well, this is terrible service," and he stormed out of the store. I know, we all know that was the wrong answer. The challenge is when you're an employee in that situation, how do you stop yourself from giving that wrong answer? That comes with experience and life experience, training, knowledge. And so in that moment, I knew it wasn't the right answer. I knew I didn't do well, and I never wanted to feel that way again. Mm-hmm. And so that was many years ago. But throughout my entire career, I've always gravitated towards two things: customer service, but in particular, what makes employees tick? How do we help our customer service employees perform their very best? And how do we remove these obstacles where we put them in a position where they're not as able to be successful? And so I've always been fascinated with customer service. I've always been fascinated with training, and all of my jobs have focused on that. And for the past 12 years, I've been a consultant who helps organizations tackle these types of problems.
Amazing. Wow. I find it so interesting that it was a not so positive experience that propelled you into this, because I'm sure, as you know, as a consultant, that many times when a customer becomes loyal to a business, if you track back the root cause, is usually a dissatisfied customer who dealt with an employee who was able to turn the situation around. And just because of how it was handled, no, they every time they come back to that business, they only want to deal with that particular employee. They'll even wait sometimes if they're on vacation to come back from vacation to transact business with that company. And it all came out of a negative experience.
That's true. There's something. Have you heard of this? There's something, a bit of psychology called the peak end rule. Have you heard of this before?
I've never heard of it, but I'm open to learning new things.
Well, so it explains why what you said is so true. And it's about customer perception, or perception in general, that we tend to not notice things that are kind of normal.
Right.
We tend to notice things that are different than normal. And what really stands out is the thing that's most different. And so the bad experience, if you kind of think of that as the heartbeat of customer service, the bad experience is kind of like this really bad deviation from our normal experience. And then a really good correction or really good fix is a huge difference. So it stands out because it's such a leap from a horrible experience to this great experience. It becomes imprinted in our memories. And particularly, so that's the peak part. If it's the last experience we had with that organization or that person, that really gets imprinted in our memories. So the peak end rule kind of explains why that big gap, it's so true. When we recover from a bad experience, that's what really sticks in our customers' minds.
Yeah, it's true. It's like they remember. And so because of that, it kind of drives their behavior going forward.
Absolutely.
Amazing. So, Jeff, you wrote this amazing book. As I was saying to you before we actually started the formal interview, I was doing some research and I came across your book. And of course, I bought it automatically just from reading some of the stuff that I heard about it. And what really grabs me about the book is that it's a practical guide that you can read either as a business owner, as a consultant, as an employee, to kind of understand the psychology of why customer experience is important and why you should be obsessed, as the book indicates, with customer service, because it's the foundation and the platform for everything else in the business. So could you tell us a little bit about, your journey in writing the book? And I'm sure you have many stories in there, as I've read. Are these stories that you accumulated over the years, or did you actually go out and specifically do research geared towards writing the book?
Well, I'm so glad that your impression was that it's a practical guide. And I really appreciate that, because that was the goal in writing it. I found kind of a couple of things. One was that I consistently had this theme with my clients, which was culture. How do we get our employees obsessed with service? And the other thing I found, quite frankly, is that companies tend to have money to invest in technology. Mm-hmm. They often don't have the budget to invest in people. And I thought if I could put this into a book and make it a practical step-by-step guide, maybe they can't afford to hire me or you to come in. I mean, maybe we wish they would, but if they don't have the budget for that, this book will give them everything I'm already sharing with my clients. And so that was the starting point to say, I want to make these ideas available. So where did they come from? They came from work I was doing, but then I wanted to profile companies that were successful. And one of my biggest challenges in writing the book was I didn't want to include some of the usual suspects, the Zappos, the Southwest Airlines, the Nordstrom, the Disney, and the Ritz-Carlton, and not to take anything away from those organizations. It's just that we've heard their stories so many times. There are other companies out there that are delivering amazing service. And so, you asked, where do these stories come from? I started researching what other organizations have a strong service culture where they're known, they have the reputation. Maybe it's service ratings, maybe it's stories written about them. They're known for having employees who are obsessed with service. And then I started researching, what do they do? And it was amazing to me that there was a consistency across all of these companies in terms of how they approached it. And so I was able to pull my own work, but then the research I did into these companies and put them into this step-by-step guide and say that, hey, there's something here. There's a process that all of these organizations are following, and we can give this recipe to anybody who cares to follow it.
Right. So basically, you tried to look at a very practical, operational way that any business, even if it's a small business with just 5 employees, would be able to extract that information and just, run with it in their own company, right?
Absolutely. Or even a team, because one of the biggest questions I get is people say, I read the book, but I'm not the CEO. And I don't even think my CEO cares too much about service. You know,
Right.
she says it's important, but I know she really cares about the budget. And so that's fine. You can still use the book. I have examples in there with specific teams or departments. So whatever the size, whatever, whether you're the CEO or you're just leading a small team within a bigger company, the goal and the idea is that you can use these tools to create a service culture in whatever you control.
All right. So we talk a lot about culture. I want you to tell me what exactly is culture. So we have lots of people who listen to this podcast globally in over 60 odd countries. And many of them are new budding entrepreneurs. Some of them are already existing entrepreneurs. So when they hear this word culture, what are some of the things that they should really be thinking about? What does that mean?
I'm glad you asked that question because I think sometimes culture is one of those words that we take for granted. We all say, yeah, culture is important, but maybe we mean different things. So to me, culture, when we're talking about an organizational perspective, it's a system of behaviors and beliefs. It's how a group of people act, think, and understand the world. So it's helpful to kind of give you an example of maybe what it is and what it is not. Sometimes we think culture is a statement that says this is our motto or these are our values, and that's not quite accurate. Culture is what people actually do. So if people are living those values each and every day, then yes, those values are accurate and they reflect your culture. If not, then they're pretty empty. So I'll give you an example. There was a bank here in the United States that about a year or so ago, there was this huge scandal because what they were doing was opening accounts for customers that didn't request them.
Wow.
And this was millions of accounts were affected. And the reason it was happening is because there were a lot of pressure for the individual employees to meet these very aggressive sales targets. So that's what kind of led to this huge scandal that the CEO resigned. There was a lot of fines. I mean, it was a big. The federal government started looking into it. What was interesting though is that the CEO, even in the moment when it was announced that this scandal broke, and the CEO still had his job, and he was announcing this scandal and this big settlement of a lawsuit, he still pointed to their culture as being customer focused. And to me, that's the perfect example of your words don't really matter if they're not backed up by your deeds. So how do people actually act? Well, in that organization, the culture was about sales pressure and doing anything at all cost to sell a product. That was their actual culture. Mm-hmm. And so when you think about organizations, one of the organizations I wrote about in the book is a place called RAI. It's I don't know if they're anywhere outside of the States, but it's basically if you love the outdoors, RAI is the place to go for your camping equipment, your hiking equipment, bicycling, whatever. And RAI is an example of culture that really matches what they say. For example, if you go in and you're looking for camping equipment, you're not going to have somebody just kind of point you to the camping equipment aisle. The person who works there who's going to help you is an avid camper. They love camping and they can't wait to share with you what they know so that you can love camping too.
True.
And that's by design because that they purposely state that their goal as an organization is to help us all enjoy the outdoors. Mm-hmm. So that to me is when culture matches what we're saying, that's pretty healthy. But at the end of the day, culture is what we do. It's how we perceive the world. It's what we actually believe.
Yeah, true. I agree. It's interesting you said it's what you do because in my process of dealing with some business this week, I called a company that provides cooking gas, and we did some business with them, and their office is not located in the city. It's located like on the outskirts of the city. So it's like 20 minutes drive. And I asked them if they did not have any other mode of payment because I told the sales rep before they came that I was going to be paying by card. And I specifically requested that the gentleman that's coming brings the card machine. Anyhow, he comes and he doesn't bring the card machine. And of course, he informs me I need to drive all the way to this location to make the payment. So I called them and I say, can the payment be taken over the phone? Oh, no, we just changed out our card machines and that's not possible anymore. I'm saying, so you expect me to drive 25 minutes outside of the the city area just to get to you to make a payment for a service that you've provided, I think you really need to talk to your finance department and think about a more customer-friendly way to accept payments from your customers. Because
Absolutely.
that to me is, and it's interesting. They were voted like, I think, one of the best customer service organizations in their industry. And, just left a really bad experience. Even when the guys came, the service was good, yes, but then the payment part is a part of the service as well.
Absolutely. And whenever that happens, I always wonder, why does it happen? And is it the person doesn't want to do their job? Sometimes, but often it's that they're put in that position where no one shared with that driver that you had that communication, or that driver was specifically told, we're not doing cards, so this is what you have to tell people. Those employees are often put in a bad position where they almost can't win.
Mm-hmm. Like you're setting them up to fail, and that's terrible.
Yeah.
So true. All right, Jeff. So we spoke a little bit about the book. We spoke a little bit about culture to our listeners can get a real understanding of what culture is. Now, I'd like you to share with me, what is some advice you would give to an employee or a business owner that they're trying to sustain a service culture? Let's say they're in business for a long time, 20 odd years.
Sure.
And they started out real good, but they've grown, and they really have not been able to manage the culture with the massive growth that they've experienced. How do they scale, but at the same time maintain that same service culture and experience that if I was doing business with you 20 years ago, it feels the same way or even better today?
I think that's a big challenge for a couple of reasons. One is that keeping culture exactly the same, I think, is impossible, because culture changes every time you add a new person to the team. Every time you add a new product or a new line of service or a new channel, it changes just a little bit. So I don't know if it's possible to keep culture the same, but maybe consistent and have it grow and evolve in the right way. That's probably the goal for those businesses. The other challenge you talked about is scale. And as businesses grow, it becomes necessary for the business owner or the business leader to trust more people to do the work. And that business owner can't be in all places at all times. They can't talk to every single customer. And so the process of building a service culture really is about that scale question. And how do I instill in my employees what I believe at my core? And the way to do that is you have to make it clear. You have to articulate it. Just like you asked me, okay, let's define service culture. Well, in these organizations, we have to define, what does our culture look like? And the tool that I use, and we talk about in the Service Culture Handbook, is something called a customer service vision. And it's a very simple statement. It could be something you already have, like a mission or vision statement for your company. But it's a very simple statement that says, this is what outstanding service looks like. And every employee in the organization has to understand what that vision statement is, what does it mean, and most importantly, how they personally contribute in their role. And once you achieve that, then you can scale using that vision as a guide. So that's the first step. You've got to have that vision. The second step is employees all have to understand it. And the third step then is you have to use that as a way of doing business. One thing I see that business owners, business leaders do that really hurts that effort is they treat culture as a separate project. So people will maybe take time out of their normal job to do some cultural things. Maybe we're on a culture committee, or we're doing culture as the theme for this year's strategic planning. And then we go back to work and just do our jobs.
Right. That's
not how you evolve culture. Culture is how, as we talked about earlier, it's our behavior. So we need to use culture as a guide for making all decisions. It's how we create strategy. It's how we invest in technology and processes. It's how we hire. It's how we train people. It's how, as a leader, I'm deciding what to put in front of my employees and talk about every single day. And if we're not talking about culture and what outstanding service should look like, then your employees aren't going to believe that it's important. They'll focus on what you talk about.
True.
And that's I think the biggest challenge for leaders. I also hear a lot of companies say to me, we're just so busy. We're too busy to deal with culture. And it's like, no, you're not, because what you're really doing is you're still creating a culture.
Just not the
it's
one
just not
that
the
you
culture
need.
you want. Yeah,
Sure.
You got it.
I agree. I think that's such a good point that you just made, that even though they're not focusing on culture, every organization has a culture. But is it the culture that you really want?
Yeah.
And so if you don't intentionally, make, as you said, have intentional activities, whether it be meetings, conversations, group outings, strategies built around what you're trying to achieve, then the culture will emerge on its own. And so you would have a culture that you don't want, all because there was no intentional act. But not because you didn't put any attention there doesn't mean that it's not formed.
Oh, that's very true. And in fact, that's often when you don't put the intention there, is it goes in a direction you really don't want it to go.
Exactly. So, those of us listening out there, I really want you to take this away from this interview, that culture is not something that just doesn't happen. It happens even without your intentional behavior behind it. It's going to manifest. So this is why you really have to intentionally work towards the culture that you want. I guess it's kind of like eating, because we have to eat every day. But if we don't intentionally make an effort to eat healthy, then we'll eat anything. And of course, the body will just consume whatever you put inside of it. And of course, if you're consuming negative things, then it will lead to disease and chronic illnesses, and, negative things will come about. However, versus taking an intentional approach towards eating, ensuring that you do your meal preps, you exercise at least 3 to 4 times a week, you're getting at least 8 to 9 hours sleep per night. Those are things that are intentional activities that you schedule into your life to ensure that it's done every single day.
I really like that analogy because you with eating, for example, we naturally crave things that are bad for us. We crave salty foods. We crave sugary foods. And so I think culture is kind of the same way. Our instincts often push us to do things that are bad for us.
Yeah.
Or bad for our organization. Shortcuts that in the moment feel like they're okay, but those shortcuts add up. I think that's a great analogy.
Yeah, it's so true. So true. All right, Jeff, could you tell us how you stay motivated every day, doing all the things that you're doing, your blog, all your speeches, the trainings that you do online? What keeps you going every single day?
I really like this question because motivation is a part of something that I look at all the time, not just my own motivation, but employee motivation. And I think we often look at it the wrong way. I think we look at how to get motivated versus how to not be demotivated.
Mm-hmm.
And so for me, motivation's easy. I do what I love. I find the intersection of what I love to do and what I can be successful doing, and where I have a little bit of skill. I think Jim Collins, and I'm probably gonna get this wrong. It's either Good to Great or Built to Last. One of his landmark books. He talked about this Hedgehog Concept for companies. It's that intersection of what do you love, what can you do well, what can you get paid to do.
Mm-hmm.
And I take that personally, and so I'm motivated. I get up every day excited because I love this. The demotivation happens not just for me, but I think for everybody, where we perceive that there's obstacles that stand in the way of doing what we love. Like in a service environment, that story I told you about my very first service encounter. I know that happens to employees every single day, where they want to provide great service. Almost every employee wants to provide great service, but there's some obstacle that they perceive as standing in their way, and that's what's demotivating them. And so every day I work on myself, but I help organizations and employees work on finding where are those obstacles, and if we can remove those obstacles, motivation becomes really natural.
True. Very true. So important. And it's interesting that you said you focus on motivating employees, because I myself do a lot of workshops for organizations, and a lot of questions that I hear from employees sometimes is, well, sometimes you can't really do what you love because you have bills to pay. But then if you have that mindset, which again, I think goes back into your attitude, because is it your motivation that affects your attitude, or your attitude that affects your motivation?
Well, I don't know. It's a chicken or the egg, right? Or or do you ask? I think about it, I'm a big sports fan, so I think, does the team that's winning, are they winning because they're motivated, or are they motivated because they're winning? I think success kind of breeds that. I think those two probably go together, right?
Yeah.
If we're doing well, we feel good, we're motivated, and if we're not doing well, we feel bad. We have a bad attitude. We feel demotivated. One thing you said about that I think is really key is there's a concept called learned helplessness that a lot of employees experience where what it is that over time they feel like they failed trying, so they just stop trying. And where it gets really bad is a lot of times they'll stay in the same job. I mean, not every job is right for every person.
True.
And so they'll stay in the job, or maybe they have those bills to pay and they don't feel that they have another good option. And so they just kind of give up, but they keep coming to work every day. And that makes it so much worse because it's defeating.
True. That's so true. So, one of the things I encourage them to do is to write down 5 things that they actually enjoy doing. And maybe one of the 5 things they can actually get paid for. And it's going to be rough. And I'm not encouraging everybody to be an entrepreneur because entrepreneurship isn't for everyone. It's a hard road. And there are times when, you feel like giving up, but you really have to extremely love, be passionate to the core of what you're doing to really ensure that on the times when the challenges get extremely overwhelming, you still push forward because it's the passion that drives you at that point. So I think at the end of the day, motivation is important and your attitude does play an integral role in that. And I'm sure in your own presentations, you would tell your business owners that they should hire for attitude and not aptitude, because I'm sure you'd agree you can train people on any form of technical skill, but one thing you cannot change or train on is their attitude. Would you not agree?
I mostly agree with that. Now, someone as a trainer, I will say there are limits, that there's people that cannot learn certain things.
True.
And we have to identify that. But generally, I think you're absolutely right. The challenge that I see business owners and business leaders have with that is people say, okay, we're going to hire for attitude. Fantastic. What's the right attitude? What's the right culture fit? And we do such a poor job of defining that we end up hiring for the wrong culture fit. We end up hiring just people that we personally like. But I have a lot of really great friends that I would never hire.
I agree.
They're not, if they're listening, well, they're not listening, but if they are listening, they won't think it's them. So it's fine, right? They'll think, well, I'm the exception. So no one's feelings are hurt. But just because I personally like you doesn't mean you're going to be awesome in this position.
True.
And one of the things I talk about in the book is coming up with a really specific way of saying, here is our service culture in our organization or our team. What are the characteristics of someone who's successful, and how do we define those and then identify those in people that we want to hire? And I discovered some amazing research. They said if you're just interviewing people and trying to get a sense of kind of their vibe and do I like them, you will actually make worse hiring decisions than if you would just skip the interview altogether, which is super scary. So your statement is 100% correct, that we want to focus on the right attitude, the right culture fit. The challenge is being really clear and specific about what that is and how I'm going to identify it.
Right. I think too, the approach. So it's good that you said that they should, in terms of the hiring process, because I think the recruitment is so important, as you said, to ensuring that you're picking the right people that will fit the core values that you're having. So let's say one of your core values is courtesy and understanding, and you're looking for an employee who demonstrates that consistently. I remember a couple of years back, an organization told me they took a very unorthodox approach to hiring. So when the employee or the candidate came for the interview, they would say, hi, I'm Mary Brown, for example. I'm here for a 10 o'clock interview. And the receptionist would look on her checklist and she would go, oh, I'm sorry, we don't have a Mary Brown for an interview here. And they would watch the behavior of the candidate to see, do they get flustered? Do they get frustrated? Do they start to argue with the receptionist? Or, how they manage themselves in that interaction. And that will determine whether or not they're going to advance them to actually interview them, or they're going to tell them, I'm so sorry, but we're unfortunately not taking any more candidates today for interviews.
That's a great example, because it comes from, I'm looking for something very specific, and then I figure out how can I identify whether or not that candidate has that thing. And then we use the test and we screen people based upon that. But
Right.
What you said, I think, is essential, is that it started with, I'm looking for courtesy. And so how do we test that versus, hey, I heard in a book or a magazine article that a really great way to interview is to do this thing where you act like they didn't have an interview. and a lot of companies and leaders will do that. They're asking these weird questions and throwing scenarios at people without knowing why they're doing it.
Yes, yes.
And there's no point to that. You're doing that for a very intentional and specific reason.
True, true. Which is why you would need to know exactly what your core values are and the behaviors that you would want demonstrated, and then how are you going to extract that based on the interactions you're having with these candidates.
Absolutely.
All right. So, Jeff, can you tell us what's the one online resource, tool, website, or app that you could not absolutely live without in your business?
Oh, just one? Oh, boy. The one that I use every single day is a website called Highrise. And it's a way of keeping track of your clients and projects kind of all in one place. So one of my core values is accountability. And I believe that if you say you're going to do something, you do it. And as you know, as an entrepreneur, you've a million different things going on. And trying to meet deadlines and maintain commitments and do what you say you're going to do is extremely difficult. And so I use that through every single day to keep track of projects, initiatives, people, and making sure that I'm maintaining all of my commitments. But I also use it to not just look at, let's say, an individual commitment, but how does that connect to all the other commitments I've made so I'm not kind of overloading my plate, so to speak. So I would say Highrise is probably, if you made me pick one. The other, if I will say there's a second or third place, perhaps, I use LinkedIn and Twitter every day as well, and primarily to connect with other people and learn from other people and see what other people are doing. I think we're definitely in a relationship business.
Sure.
And I'm, as someone who's passionate about training and adult learning, I'm always learning myself, and that's often where I find what are people doing that's interesting. So those would be kind of my second place picks. But Highrise, if you made me pick one, Highrise would probably be the tool I use most often.
All right. So we're going to have the link to Highrise in the show notes for this episode, so you can look out for that, those of you that are listening. Now, could you tell us some of the books, maybe 2 or 3, that have had the biggest impact on you?
I'm so glad I listened to your podcast because I've anticipated this question. And the reason I need to anticipate this question is I'm usually reading 2 or 3 books at a time.
Oh, wow.
I love to read. So I thought about, what are the books that stick with me? I think that's the challenge with the book, isn't it? That we read a book and we say, oh, it was good. And then you ask, okay, what have you used from that book? I'll get back to you on that.
That's true.
And so these are some books that I use a lot. One is called Street Smarts, and it's by Norm Brodsky and Bo Burlingham. Norm Brodsky writes a monthly column for Inc. magazine. And what I love about it, it's an entrepreneur's perspective on the business side of running a business. Oh. And I think in the world of customer service and customer experience, too many of us are unfamiliar or tentative around the business side, the number side. I had a discussion online with someone the other day where they were upset that executives only cared about the budget. And the point I tried to make, and this comes from this book Street Smarts, is the way to get executives to care about customer service is you have to translate customer service into the
numbers,
budget.
True.
Because that's their language. And if we're not doing that, or if we don't know how, we're only hurting ourselves.
True.
Yeah.
Agreed.
So that one, it's such a practical book. I think anybody can really glean from it. So Street Smarts. The next one is a book called Getting Things Done. I read this many years ago. It's by a guy named David Allen, and it's a system for managing your time and commitments. And it's a principle-based system rather than, go out and buy this portfolio and you have to use this specific software. It's more about principles to use whatever you feel comfortable using. And I use those principles to do things that allow me to keep on top of things. For example, at the end of every day, I have 0 messages in my email inbox. And for most people, that's unbelievable. But it's because I have these set of principles that David Allen shared with me in his book that I use every day.
Ah.
And I'd say the third book is a book that really made an impact on me. It's called Lincoln on Leadership by Donald T. Phillips. And what he did was he studied the United States 16th president, which some people, probably myself included, would say would be one of our most amazing leaders in history. And he looked at some of the things that Abraham Lincoln did as a leader that we can pull from today. And one of my favorite examples that I use as a consultant and trainer is Lincoln was really the first president to spend a lot of time going to people rather than expecting people to come to him for a meeting or a conversation. And the reason
he went to
did that
them.
it's management by walking around, right? Which we kind of know now. But the idea was if you approach people in an environment where they're comfortable and make them feel like we're on an even keel, then, and you're not trying to intimidate them, then they're much more likely to open up to you and have an honest and frank conversation.
True.
And I've learned when I am working with a client, for example, and I meet with their frontline staff and ask them about their job, they always are very ready to tell me exactly what's working well and exactly what they think is going wrong. And I think it's because of that principle of coming to them and making them comfortable. So those would be my top three that I think about constantly.
Excellent. All right. So we'll also have those in the show notes for those of you listening that would like to connect with those 3 books. And they really sound really good. I think I'm going to definitely check out one of them. All right. So what is the one thing that's going on in your life right now that you are really excited about? Either something that you're working on to develop yourself or your people.
I've had this theme. I talked about it a little bit earlier, but I have this theme for a bit now where I realized that my audience doesn't have a lot of budget to spend on customer service. Maybe technology, but not on people. And so one of the things that I've been trying to do is transform my own business where I can make resources, tools, concepts available to people at little to no cost and somehow still get paid. So a few examples, my book, the investment in the book is $14.95 for the paperback or $9.99 for Kindle. That's a pretty low investment, yet I put all the tools that I use as a consultant in that book. So you don't have to hire me because you probably have $14.95. You may not have my consulting fee. I have training videos on LinkedIn Learning and lynda.com, and I've learned that a lot of my clients and companies I work with already have a subscription to one of those platforms. So you can get my training without having to pay for me to come in. The video's right there. It's available to you. And if you don't have a subscription, it's fairly inexpensive. And then things like this podcast, I love this opportunity and really appreciate it because it's a chance for us to have a dialogue about service. But it doesn't cost anything to subscribe to your podcast and learn from it and learn from some of the, not just myself, but some of the other amazing experts that you interview. Those are free resources that anybody can take advantage of. And I'm really excited about, the opportunity to help people wherever they are in their journey.
Yeah. Amazing. All right. Thank you, Jeff. So we had a wonderful conversation. Our listeners are all pumped up. They're saying, okay, how can I get in touch with Jeff? I want to talk to him some more. I want to follow him. I want to be a part of his journey. Where can our listeners find you online?
I have the advantage of being, to my knowledge, the only Jeff Toister on the planet. So I'm really easy to find. On Twitter, for example, my Twitter handle is Toister. It's Toister. I really love engaging and having conversations on Twitter. I have a weekly customer service tip email. It's one email once a week, one tip, and it's at my website, toistersolutions.com/tips. And when you get that email, the email comes from me. And one of the things I love the most is people will reply to it, and it comes right to my personal email box. I think it's funny because not everybody realizes that. So they'll say, if you would share with Mr. Toister that. I'm like, no, it's me. It's Jeff. I'm right here. I'm easy to find. I even put my email address, jeff@toistersolutions.com, and my phone number right in my book because I want people to be able to call or email or text me or get in touch with me. So I'm really easy to find.
Excellent. And I'm happy you pointed that out because a lot of times when I'm trying to research someone that I find of great interest that I'd like to interview, it's so hard to get in touch with them. And I'm saying to myself, these people are in customer experience, either with their own business or they're subject matter experts delivering customer experience strategies to different businesses. But yet they're so hard to get in touch with. When you go on their websites, there's no way for you to contact them. They have some third party agency that's responding to you, and it's a nightmare. But yet this is a product that they're selling and, building themselves as this particular person in a space where you should be easily accessible. So I think that's a really good point that you made, that you are accessible.
Oh, thank you. I will say that in our profession of this customer service, customer experience, consulting or thought leader, beware, because not everybody walks the talk. And I'll give you one positive example. I happened to hear one of your recent episodes with Shep Hyken. Mm-hmm. And Shep is, pretty much at the top of the world in terms of customer service authorities. And this is a very busy guy, but he walks the walk.
He does.
And I look at him as a role model, because not everybody does that, quite frankly. I'm not naming those people, but I'll tell you, Shep is somebody that I really look up to as a role model, that if that guy is that busy and he'll respond to an email or he'll be helpful, well, I better be able to do it too, because I know I'm not as busy as he is.
True. That's so true. And it's a good thing you brought that up, because we did have some technological difficulties. I think originally it was on his end, and he really made all effort for us to reschedule and have the interview done. And I really appreciated that. And I kind of looked on it just like you did. This guy's really busy. I kind of look up to him too. And he's like the guru of customer experience. And I'm like, oh my goodness, like he's not too busy that he has not found the time to give some attention to my request, and I really appreciated that. And I think in life, when you really give to others from a place of goodness, that so much abundance abounds onto you naturally.
Absolutely. I believe that too.
All right, Jeff. Now, before we wrap up our interview here today, we normally ask our guests one surprise question, and that is, what is one quote or saying that during times of adversity or challenges you tend to revert to, or, think about, to kind of bring yourself back to that place where, okay, this is really what I'm here for. This is my purpose. This is your quote that you kind of pull on.
That's a good surprise question, because I'm not a big quote person. And here's why I'm not a big quote person, because I think that so many quotes, there's two reasons actually. One reason is I see quotes and they sound great, but then what do we do with them? So I'm more of an action person, right?
Okay.
And the second piece is when I've done research on some quotes and I've been disappointed to find that person never said that, or that's not what they meant. And I'll give you a fun example. You've heard the quote, I'm sure, the customer is always right.
Yes.
No one said that. No one ever did. And that it bothers me that we've accepted this as this kind of mantra in customer service. But I did some research on, okay, where did this come from then? Why do we believe this? And there's not really agreement, but it came from a few places. One possible source is Cesar Ritz, and the famous hotelier, or the Ritz-Carlton. And so he said, the customer is never wrong. And the context was that even if the customer is wrong, of course they are sometimes,
right,
you don't argue with them.
Yeah.
You just find a way to help them become right. Marshall Fields was a famous retailer. He said, right or wrong, the customer is always right.
Mm-hmm.
And his point was the same thing, that the customers, of course, will make mistakes, but we don't argue with them. Our role here is to help them become right, to help them succeed. And so I wish I had a great quote to share with you, but when I find those quotes and I find out that no one ever said that, but the story behind the quote often is much more interesting.
Yeah, it's funny you said you use that particular one as an example, because in most of my workshops, towards the end of the session, I always explain to the participants that the customer is always right literally is not a true statement.
That's right.
Because there are times when the customer is wrong. But what we should be guided by is the principle that as employees, we are not here to prove the customer wrong. We're really here, as you were saying, the Ritz people said, that we're here to help them. They're wrong, but we're not here to say, hey, Mr. Customer, you're wrong and we're going to punish you. But more like, it's okay. Let's work back and see how we can undo what's happened and find a solution so you can leave here feeling good. Let's make this right.
That's it. See, you understand the quote. You understand what it really means.
So I do definitely share that each and every time because that's a big question that I'm asked each time. The customer is always right. That's not true. And, I just diffuse that whole thought that they have. But it's interesting. I learned something new today that I've never really done any research on it. But because I've gotten people asking me that so many times, I've found a way to handle that question. But now that I know that it really didn't come from anywhere, it even makes it, more powerful in my mind, knowing that it's good to explain to them that they need to take this particular brainwash out of their head that the customer is always right, because it's actually an incorrect statement from a literal point of view, because customers are humans and humans are not perfect, and so they cannot always be right. But our responsibility is not to prove them wrong.
And so you knew this even without knowing the origin of the quote. So it was still working for you.
Yes, it was. Oh my gosh, I had so much fun on this interview with you, Jeff. Did you have fun?
I had a great time, and I really appreciate it. It's a fun podcast, and it's been an honor to be a part of it.
Thank you so much for taking time out of your busy day. Thank you for your patience during my initial Wi-Fi challenges at the beginning. And I just want to wish you all the best on your journey, and feel free to keep in touch. We really appreciated having you on this podcast. And I know all of the persons that are going to be listening to this when the episode is released will definitely get as much value and insight that I have gained from it, and probably even more. So thank you so much.
Oh, it's been my pleasure. Thank you.
So thanks for listening. I'm your host, Yannick Grant. We really appreciate your support of this podcast. Are you ready to grow your business even more, or improve your leadership skills, or train your team members in the art of customer service? Give us a call at 305-848-0815 or visit our website at www.yannickgrant.com. That's YANNIQUEGRANT.com. Remember, 305-848-0815 or visit our website at yannickgrant.com. Our new online course, Mastering Customer Experience and Increasing Your Revenue, is now available. The link for this will be on the show notes of each episode starting September 7, 2016. The first 2 modules are free, so hop on over, have a look, and take the steps to increase your revenue.
Thanks for listening. For more awesome resources to take your customer service game to another level, head over to navigatingthecustomerexperience.com. See you next time.